Hey everyone, I'm Ayana Lage. This is Asked by Ayana. Today I am joined by Grace Baldridge, who performs under the name Semler. I first heard of Grace via Twitter actually earlier this year when they became, I don't know if you were the first, but a openly queer artist to top the Christian music charts, which I mean, we'll get into it, but it immediately caught my eye, and I knew that I wanted to have you on to talk about your album, how you got here, and yeah, just where it's taken you. So thanks so much, Grace, for making the time to chat.
Thank you for having me. I am so excited to be here and the 6 degrees of separation that we probably have been in each other's circles for some time and now we finally get to meet. I'm just really excited to catch up.
Yeah, so rad. All right, so I never know whether to start in the beginning or not, but I feel like the beginning um, would kind of get us to where you're at today musically and all of that. Um, so tell me more about yourself, who you are for people who haven't heard of you, and just like your background with music.
Yeah, so I've been writing music, sort of jingles in my little coconut brain since kind of as early as I have memories. I didn't know that it was songwriting. When you're so little, you don't think of it that way. But I've always been, something would happen to me like on the playground or whatever. And my sort of natural like fight or flight response was like jingles in my brain. And then as I got older, I developed an interest in teaching myself instruments to try and parlay what I was hearing in my head into something more tangible. And then when I realized that I was queer, made songwriting a lot more difficult because I had to hide what I was writing about. I had to like hide my jingles. And so I poured myself into other interests and activities. And I played basketball very seriously for most of my life up until, well, through college. And then I tore my ACL like immediately and then I stopped. And at some point in time, well, I mean, it was like during the pandemic, during quarantine, I really like sat with myself as we all did and reflected on like what I wanted to talk about and things that maybe I hadn't dealt with before as a songwriter that seemed perhaps off limits. And what came up for me ended up being my faith. Growing up in the church, my dad is a priest, and so I grew up in the rectory. I was like a terrifying, like hellish preacher's kid, like just absolutely. My parents are very sweet, but I certainly tested them, and I started thinking about just memories I'd never processed before. I'd always sort of said that I didn't have any religious trauma because ultimately, when I came out, my parents were accepting. So I would say, "Oh, that's not my
Yeah.
struggle. That wasn't my thing." And when you were alone with yourself, like we all were during the pandemic, things started bubbling to the surface. And that's what happened with me. And I started writing about it. And I ended up recording the songs that I had been working on my USB mic, like in this room. And I put them out independently through a website. And it was called Preacher's Kid. And it went number one on iTunes on the Christian music charts, which, as far as I can tell, is the first openly queer artist to do so. There have been other queer artists who have charted as number one and came out later, so it's not the I'm certainly like in the footsteps of people who have come before me, but as far as like an openly like queer Christian project, I'm pretty sure that this was the first. And then kind of my whole life changed, and now I'm on a different path than I was on before, and it's very exciting, and also it's totally uncharted. So we'll see what happens.
And the funny thing is, I imagine I was like, this has to be the first, just because I remember when I saw it on Twitter, I was like, damn, like this is so unexpected, and it Preacher's Kid took off like at least in my circles, like everyone who I like follow and in like this like progressive Christian culture bubble is kind of like tweeting about it and all of that. I mean, what were you expecting when you put it out there?
I wasn't really expecting. I mean, I was not expecting what happened at all.
Yeah.
I was really hoping that maybe we could crack top 40. I thought that would be really cool. But I also it was really just a test, perhaps like a leap of faith, if you will, to see if a project like this would resonate with people, because I was told to my face, and I'm not alone in this, that there is not a market or interest in this type of expression of faith, in this type of Christian story. That there's just simply not a place for people like us, and not just for queer people, but for anyone who's speaking about how their faith informs them to fight against purity culture, to fight against toxic
Yeah.
masculinity, to fight for social justice. Like, none of that, like, basically, like, don't talk about any of that. That's not, there's no place for a faith expression and music in this genre. Um, and so I don't know what I was expecting, but I was hopeful that maybe it would find the right people. If anyone needed to hear this type of thing, that maybe we'd find each other. And I'm so happy that that's been the case.
And when I first listened to the album, I honestly wasn't sure what to expect. I mean, I'm not sure if this is your story, but I mean, I still will listen to worship music or whatever, but if I see something at the top of the Christian charts, I'm usually like a little bit like hesitant, like
Same.
okay, like what am I
Same.
going to
Oh, yeah.
encounter? So it's, and then there you are. But it's, you know, your record is like so honest and so um just vulnerable and so relatable. I mean, even again for those of us who um are not, you know, queer Christians, but have stepped outside of the mold of like white evangelicalism.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, so I have I've been a fan since I first listened through the first time. Um, but you're also big on TikTok, which I love. So did that kind of come hand in hand, or how has this all kind of like just come together in the last few months?
Yeah, it totally played a huge role. So I was working on an unscripted documentary series called State of Grace, which is about the intersection of faith and American life. And the last episode that we filmed before lockdown was about inclusion in CCM, in the contemporary Christian music industry. And then we went right into lockdown, and any hosting job, that was my main career before this, was like just dried up because there was no travel, there was no like filming in studios, like any sort of jobs that I had lined up were just either put on hold, were totally canceled, were like a hiatus or whatever. And I felt really, it can be so demoralizing. I really thought that this year was going to go a certain type of way for me with regards to unscripted documentary content. I was really hitting my stride with that. And then it just totally ended. And my very sweet wife, I don't know if this was totally intentional, but I just felt so listless. And she comes to me one day with her phone and she was like, I kind of created this account on this like new app called TikTok. And I feel like you might like it as an app. You might have fun looking around. And I was like, oh, like I was in such a just crabby mood about
Yeah.
life. And so I started scrolling through it and I became so inspired by people sharing their stories, these short video creations, just ways of connecting. Because I thought that it was like a dancing app for teenagers because I am a
Right.
millennial. So I was like, this is not for me. And then seeing other people just like sharing their stories, sharing their perspective. Like I was learning about history, I was learning about activism. There was like so much going on here. And I really just wanted to like toss my hat into the ring and like see, contribute to sort of the discourse and find my little lane. And the lane at the time, because it was so front of mind, was the Christian music industry. And so I started I would put out like little TikToks of songs I was working on or covers of old CCM songs and just see what the response was. And that's kind of what got me thinking that maybe we could crack top 40 because people would really respond to it. And I don't know if you felt this way when you're in like a really like Christian environment and then you can't fit in. You're like, I can't make this work. I can't fit in. This is not for me. This is unhealthy. They make you feel sometimes like you're the problem and you're the only one
Yeah.
who has this problem. And so then you feel so isolated and you're almost embarrassed to talk about it because it's like, what's wrong with me? Like, why couldn't is everyone else just fine and making this work? And so seeing this community on TikTok of people that were like, no, 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 like we were never alone. We were never isolated. that's just something that they told us so that we wouldn't find community with each other and connection with each other and start adding up, putting our stories together and being like, this is a pattern of abuse and toxic behavior.
Yeah, I
So
think that
TikTok helped me with that.
yeah, and it's funny because I put off downloading TikTok for a lot of the same reasons. I was like, "Okay, this is an app that, like, my little sister is into." But there are, like, these very vibrant communities, and I do think that, there is this idea that you are sowing division or, not pursuing community or relationship or whatever the Christianese we've all heard. If you do have questions or if you do have
Hmm.
criticism and, I do think that I do love I feel this way about TikTok and Twitter, that it to your point, it kind of brings me back to, like, sometimes, like, why I'm still doing this. I'm like, "Okay, there are people like me. There is something here." This idea of, like, okay, like, a Christian mold isn't really the case. It's just kind of like the loudest faction
Yes.
of American Christianity. So yeah, so I didn't realize that TikTok came first. So you were on TikTok before you released this album.
Yes. I mean, TikTok was the primary way that I promoted Preacher's Kid because I didn't
Okay.
have a team or a label or anything like that. So I was like, and I still very strongly feel this way. If we are going to do this, it's going to be a grassroots thing because there's going to be, I mean, not only has there been no help or acknowledgement from CCM, which I of course is expected, but they've actually adjusted since releasing Preacher's Kid some of the rules to submitting under the genre that will, like, I'm gonna have to really like surmount with this next release to try and like chart or get the same sort of opportunity that other, you know, good Christian artists have.
Right. And so this is kind of like a silly question because I know the answer is that it's Christian music. That's why you're releasing on the Christian charts. But I'm still curious, are you ever tempted to kind of move away from this, like, very, I don't know, like, insular industry label,
Mm.
as you're creating music, given that, like, it hasn't been easy?
I think it's possible that down the line I won't be writing from this place. Like I might want to explore different themes and that will all be well and good. But the
Yeah.
place that I'm in right now, for better, for worse, they all sort of keep falling around this theme. And I just
Yeah.
want to be true to that. They just come back to me wrestling with faith and working through faith. But I also feel a degree of privilege that a lot of Christian artists may never experience in that like I've I am independent. I've been able to already break this mold. I never fit in the first place. So if
Yeah.
down the line I want to be writing about something else or I feel myself inspired to write about something else, I'm not going to have the same constraints that Christian artists do. I'm not worried about people who I'm not like worried about my audience, my listenership,
Right.
not sticking with me. Whereas I think in the Christian market, it's like you sing worship music and you sing it our way or you get out and like we're not
Yeah.
following you. So right now I'm wrestling through like religious deconstruction and how that sort of fits into me as a person and how my connection to the divine is changing and expanding, but down the line maybe I'll feel more sort of settled and I will feel like I've said what I had to say and I might explore other themes and then it won't be a Christian record. But for now and for the EP that's coming out this fall, it's these are wrestlings through faith. I actually think the EP that's coming out later this fall is perhaps like more in some ways like almost more directly about God, if that makes sense. Like the
Yeah.
preacher's kid was like almost like about me as a preacher's kid, and I think
Yeah.
this next one is a little bit more wrestling with God, but also there's like a storytelling element too. I got stories. I got stories I got to tell.
And what has the prep process been like, knowing, I mean, you kind of have an idea given the reception to Preacher's Kid that there are going to be people who are listening. So are you still, like, able to just, like, write and record at home? Is it more formal? Like, how are you approaching your EP?
Well, I don't think I can I am writing and recording at home, but the recording at home looks different. My friend, Jax Anderson, comes over when we record at home, and she brings like her, like she has a proper mic because
Right.
it's just sort of like I want to give listeners higher quality, but also stay true to the type of music I write. And it's all about sort of growth as an artist. There's a song right now on the project that I did record in like a full studio that I think sounds like huge. Like I think it's probably gonna be the last song on the project, and we got like the drummer from the internet is on it, and like I've never had drums in a song before because I've never been able to have drums at home. Like what am I gonna do? Like bang on my desk? And so it's been cool for this one to have like some of them are right in here, right on the guitar, like they sound crisper, I think, than what I was able to do on a USB mic, but they really are still true to who I am like as an artist. And then also there are going to be offerings on the project where it's like, oh my gosh, like this is like a blowout, huge, proper studio experience that I'm really excited to like share with people because I want to show sort of my range as an artist.
That is that's awesome. I'm looking forward to it. I know a lot of other people are too. But just rewinding a little, because I know that you kind of glossed over this, but you didn't grow up in like um okay, obviously you know better than I do how you grew up, but my understanding is you didn't grow up in the Christian home that most people picture when they hear Christian home.
Hmm.
Um and just like how what's your relationship with, I guess, with like evangelical Hillsong style, for lack of a better word, Christianity? When did you encounter it? I mean, I know that, as you said, your dad is a priest, and it's just different, I think, from the upbringing that I
Yeah.
and a lot of other people had. So how did that kind of inform your faith and just like your relationship with everything?
So my dad is an Episcopal priest, and the Episcopal denomination is one of the more progressive Christian
Yeah.
denominations. And so I'm really fortunate in that regard that that was like my home church. But when it came to like youth group and when it came to if this makes sense, like pop culture, like the pop culture that
Yeah.
was brought into my home was still Christian pop culture, and that's Hillsong. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like you like like the cool Christian like CDs and stuff, like that is a stronghold for an evangelical tradition. So any sort of like youth group or mission trip or like preschool breakfast type thing, that was all outsourced to more evangelical leaders. And
Right.
my dad is a very like sweet and trusting person and also is a white cis straight man, and so for him the world's been great. What? These people are fine. And so he never, and he and I have like talked extensively about this since, I don't think he knew to like really question anyone else's theology because it never would disagree with him. And so these are nice people to him, so he's sending his kid there who he doesn't know is gay, who's like deeply closeted, to have what he thinks will be a nice youth group, normal mission trip experience or whatever, which I mean, mission trips as a whole other conversation, but like,
Right.
yeah, you know what I mean? Like, I think that I say it in my song Bethlehem, like, I think they're like toxic white savior scams. But anyway, he, that was how I was introduced to evangelism as like the
Yeah.
cool type of Christianity. Like my church was actually not cool because we had the robes and and it seemed like, actually it really seemed like my church had more rules because there was way more liturgical emphasis on like the hymnals and the order of service, all that stuff. And then you'd go to these, like, I remember there was this one church that met in a bar, so it felt like it was so cool, called The Well. And the church service was, and honestly, like, some of the people there were very nice, but they'd say things where it'd be like, you know how it is, where like someone says something where you're like, I'm not safe here, like I'm never going to come out
Yeah.
here, like it's like a micro thing. So that's how I was introduced to evangelism. And then I think what also really like turned the corner for me to start like dismantling and deconstructing just how I was introduced to Christianity was when a friend of mine was born again, became born again, and how that like drastically altered our friendship and how she related to me and how she cared for me, and how I was able to connect with her and love her. Like it really broke our relationship, and that was like a just that was shattering for me because I just I was like, I have to go to the source of like why is someone telling my friend that she has to like break up with me, basically.
Yeah.
What's going on here? So that if is that does that answer your question about sort of like how an Episcopal becomes like involved with like if you can avoid like evangelism, like you totally should, but
No, but I
it's
mean, as you said, not to talk over you, but I was going to say, as you said, it is unavoidable because I grew up in like a very small church. Um, it was not a progressive church, but nonetheless, all of the cool youth groups in high school, were like lights, camera, action, like everyone was so cool.
yeah.
Obviously their theology was like awful, but that's what all my friends were doing. So I was like, that's so cool.
You're so
Um,
it's totally I think it's so normal, especially when you're younger. Like I try and be gentle to my like teenage self because you're just figuring out the
yeah,
world. We are so susceptible to aesthetics. And that's what evangelism, like American evangelism, has such an incredible knack for is these very cool um, pop culture adjacent aesthetics that will be very appealing to especially kids trying to find their way in the world, trying to fit in. Like you're trying to fit
yeah.
in, and like no offense to the Episcopal tradition, but like that's not cool. Like, what? These robes? No. My dad's like chanting at the altar. Like, no, this is a cult. Like, absolutely not. And then you go to like I remember going to a service once with my friend, and it was, so I grew up in Belgium. So there'd be,
Yeah.
in Waterloo, Belgium. So there'd be like American like church plants. And everyone kind of had like a different American church plant. There were like three or four, I would say. I remember going to one of them and the pastor had a Hawaiian shirt on, like what I'm wearing today, and a Hawaiian shirt and like cargo shorts on and was like leading service. And I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Because I was like, man, this guy gets it. Because because I agree on a certain level that it shouldn't matter what you wear in order to come before
Right.
God. Like God doesn't it doesn't matter what you wear, what you look like or anything like that. And so already you're like hooking my little 13-year-old brain with this like
Yeah.
pastor wearing a Hawaiian shirt. I was like, this guy's the future. Like he's not wearing a robe. Like he doesn't need that. I should trust him.
Yeah, the come as you are, um, because again, I grew up in a church that wasn't progressive, but was very legalistic, to use like Christian terminology. Like, you dressed
Right.
up for church, you did this, you did that. So when I went to church and people were wearing jeans, I was like, this is so cool. It was not, in fact, cool. But I did not realize that you grew up in Belgium. So like, your introduction to the American megachurch model, I'm assuming, came later in life than most people.
Yeah. Well, the American megachurch, yeah, because there weren't any megachurches in
Yeah.
Belgium. All the churches that I was exposed to, they were all like smaller expat like church plants, basically. And
Okay.
then I would come to the US for like basketball camp or something. And I mean, that was really when I remember being like kind of seeing just how entrenched with politics American Christianity was. I
Yeah.
remember going to a church service at my dad went to the Citadel, which is a military college or
Yeah.
university. So I went to oh my gosh. We went to a service, like a church service one day when he was like visiting the campus for like old time's sake. And the pastor gets up in like his military thing and to give a sermon, and he immediately starts talking about like defending the war in Iraq. Like there was like almost no Bible, like nothing, like just like let's talk about the
Right.
war in Iraq. And it was like it was shocking because I was like, how does he have a job after this? Like this is really bad. How is this allowed? And my dad like really struggled to explain to me just how entrenched in like right-wing politics American Christianity was, because that I didn't grow up with that. And then I started, you go to like watch TV in hotel rooms and you see like the mega church culture there, but still, it still seemed like cool because it was all like it would be
Yeah.
artists that I respected, that I grew up listening to, that were sort of giving their endorsement of these events. I would, go online. I would like go on YouTube and watch conferences, because I couldn't attend them in person. And so I'd watch these conferences and I'd see these bands. Like I remember like watching a conference and Flyleaf was like the lead singer of
Yeah.
Flyleaf was speaking. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. And then it was like an anti-gay thing, but it was like in this like really cool, it was like filmed really cool in this like mega church thing with like kids that
Yeah.
look just like me. And so I'm just sitting there being like, okay, this is fine. Like, and so I was sort of introduced to it in a like virtual sense, but it was still so impactful because they're artists that have such a place in your heart, because it's not just like they're an ordinary musician or an artist. They're you perceive them to be closer to God. Like they have something
Yeah.
figured out that you don't have figured out. And so that was really how, like, it was really like this virtual engagement with like mega church culture. And then obviously when I moved to the US, it's like unavoidable.
Yeah. It's so funny hearing your perspective and even like being surprised at like right wing nationalism in churches because um like two of the churches that my husband used to be a worship leader, and two of the churches he was working at had an American flag like prominently on stage, and like it wasn't up for debate, and it didn't hit either of us, I think, until like a little bit too late. Like, hey, that's not normal. Like having an American flag in the sanctuary, main space is not something that is like biblical or
Yeah.
necessarily like theologically healthy. Um but what I know you kind of mentioned you're still going through deconstruction. Did you have like a deconstruction moment? Has that kind of always been a journey for you? Just like how I mean, frankly, I'm always curious as to like what makes people stick with it instead of walking fully away since I since I've almost walked fully away so many times myself.
Mhm.
Just yeah, like how did you land where you're at with your faith?
I think there were two sort of, I think, pivotal moments for me that I always come back to, which is that when I almost like resigned myself and admitted who I was. Like I've always like who you're seeing is like my wildest dreams when I was 5 or 6. I used to
Mhm.
like style my hair secretly in my room to look, not like, I didn't know I'd have a mullet, but I would always like steal my brother's clothing, and like I always
Yeah.
knew how I felt comfortable in my skin. But I also knew from an early age that socially that was not going to be okay. Um, when I got to a point where I was like, I'm done trying to please other people, because that's what it was. It was like pleasing the world. I want to live as who I am. I want to be honest. It was like in this incredible sort of, I felt so held. It was like the first time that I was like interested in scripture. It was the first time that I was interested to like pray casually in the way that you always hear people talk about. Um, when I was done performing as someone else and just being myself, it's like I finally got the image bearer that I am, and I felt so received by God. And I know that a lot of conservative Christians would be like, "Oh, well, that's just a feeling. Like you just felt that. That's not true. That's like Satan that's deceiving you or whatever." And they're totally free to feel that way. Those are their feelings. But that was a very like that was a very transformative moment for me when I just knew. I was like, I'm not an abomination. And you always hear that like you'll feel shame and you'll feel this like regret, and you'll find this separation and division from not only like your family but from God. And I didn't experience that. I felt closer to God. I was more interested in scripture, in biblical context, in biblical literacy. So it just didn't like, the math wasn't mathing basically. So that was one moment where I was like, all right, this is like, I think this was other people getting in the way of me and God, and I need to like cut that off. And then as far as deconstruction, because I was kind of happy like being in my own little world. And then
Yeah.
the situation with my friend made it to a point where it's like, I don't think that I can be um a bystander anymore. I think I need to be a bit more engaged and active in helping other people wrestle through what I think has become incredibly toxic messaging from, I will say, like the American church, specifically like white evangelicalism in this
Yeah.
country. And I was like, and it shouldn't have had to come home for me to realize that. But unfortunately, that was the case where, like, as soon as I was faced with this, rejection from someone who I loved like family, then I was like, all right, we got to get to work. And I need to figure out what is she being taught? What are these churches teaching people? And what can I do to stop this harm? So I think those are the two moments for me where, one, I just felt grounded in my faith when I was told that I shouldn't. So sort of like under like that cognitive dissonance almost gave me this fortitude of strength. And then the motivation, and I think the discernment of like, and now with that faith, like now that you feel stable, you have to do something about it. And so that's been sort of my deconstruction process, and I'm still very much like working through things, and I feel like I'm more like in the trenches, so to speak, than ever before, of just like sorting through stuff and finding people, and processing my own feelings through songwriting. And who knows how long we'll be here. I'll let you know.
Hey, well, there's time. There's no rush. Um, I so appreciate that because I think that that is so relatable. And I personally feel like the further I move away from what I once thought was quote unquote biblical truth, the closer to love and to God that I feel. Just because there's so much fear. I think that is just taught. In just as you're growing up and as you're hearing all of these things about like God loves you no matter what, but you got to
Hmm.
do this and this or else you're going to go to hell.
Yeah.
I feel like there's no way to hear that in your like formative years and not be a little bit messed up
Yeah. Or
because
like,
of it.
Jesus loves you. Accept Jesus in your life, and you will be saved. You will be redeemed. There's nothing you could do to earn it. But you could get some brownie points if you do this, this, and this. Like, you could never earn this. There's nothing like we are saved, and he doesn't ask for anything in return. But he does ask that you engage in godly womanhood. Like, what? No, it's like, what? Make up your mind.
No, I totally agree. Well, I'm glad that you have been so open and that your music is there because I've had a lot of experiences with Christianity and white American Christianity, but I think that for queer Christians, the experience is so magnified and the rhetoric and just like the toxic theology, I can only imagine is just so much more damaging. So I'm glad that you're in this space and that you're doing what you're doing.
Thank you. I don't know if it's necessarily like more damaging. I think Christians just feel emboldened to be more specific and outright about their like condemnations with regards to the queer community. But I think that, as we've seen, I think especially recently, white evangelicalism isn't really concerned about anything except protecting the status quo. They've just been able to be more specific, I think, in how they express that about the queer community. But they've shown, I think, through their actions that with regards to any other marginalized community, they're like they're not willing to engage either. So the whole thing is toxic, and we need to tear it down.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. All right. Well, I was gonna just end by asking, do you have any advice or words of wisdom for people who are writing Christian music that doesn't sound like what you would hear on K Love? Just like what advice? I mean,
Kayla.
clearly I don't know. Hopefully they don't sue me for dragging them. But I mean, I think that there is such a desire for this music that isn't formulaic, that's like honest and raw. Um, yeah, just like what would you say?
Well, I would say that there's such a place for this type of musical expression. There are people who need to hear your experience, um, to trust your instincts, to trust that people who need it will find your music, to sort of look at the example of Preacher's Kid and look at how we showed up for each other. We will do that again for you. Not to be discouraged by the parameters that have been set up by these gatekeepers in CCM, to carve your own lane and keep writing and keep putting it out there. There is more of us than we think, and we're making incredible music, and I'm excited to hear everyone's story. So I think just keep going. I know it might seem lonely, but you are not alone.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Grace. I always put it in the show notes, but tell everyone where they can find you, where to find your music.
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Grace Baldridge, and you can listen to my music wherever you get music under my artist name, which is Semler, Semler, and stream Preacher's Kid, and look out for this new EP this fall.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Grace.
Thank you.